Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight we bring you The Red Room by H.G. Wells, a chilling tale of shadows and fear, reimagined in English with a fresh cinematic voice. Prepare yourself, the darkness awaits.
"I assure you," I declared, my voice steady, "it would take a ghost of flesh and bone to shake me." I rose from my seat, the firelight licking at my glass as I held it aloft. "It is your own choosing," muttered the man with the withered arm, his eyes sliding toward me with a strange suspicion. 28 years I have lived, and not once has a phantom crossed my path. The old woman did not look at me. Her gaze was locked upon the flames, her pale eyes wide and unblinking. "Aye," she whispered, her voice brittle as dry leaves, 28 years, and yet you have never seen a house such as this. There are many things yet to witness, and many sorrows to endure." Her head swayed slowly from side to side, as though in rhythm with some invisible dirge. I suspected these aged figures were weaving their warnings to heighten the dread of this place. Setting my empty glass upon the table, I glanced around the chamber. In the warped mirror at the far end, I caught sight of myself, distorted, broadened, transformed into a figure of impossible strength. "Well," I said, "if I encounter anything tonight, I shall leave wiser than I came. My mind is open to whatever truth awaits." "It is your own choosing," the man repeated, his voice heavy with finality. From the passage beyond came the uneven thud of a stick, followed by a dragging step. The door groaned on its hinges, and another ancient figure shuffled inside, more bent, more shriveled than the first. He leaned upon a single crutch, a shade covering his eyes, his lips sagging pale and loose over rotting teeth. He collapsed into a chair opposite me, coughing violently, the sound rattling through the silence. The old man with the withered arm cast him a glance of open dislike. The old woman did not stir. Her gaze was still fixed upon the flames, her pale eyes wide and unblinking. "I said, it is your own choosing," the first man repeated once the coughing subsided. "It is my own choosing," I answered firmly. The man with the shaded eyes turned his head at last, studying me with a sudden jerk. For an instant I glimpsed his inflamed, glittering eyes, small, feverish, and unsettling. Then the fit of coughing seized him again, drowning the room in its harsh echoes. "Why not drink?" asked the man with the withered arm, sliding the mug toward his companion. The man beneath the shade lifted the vessel with a trembling hand, spilling more upon the table than into the glass. On the wall behind him a monstrous shadow crouched, mocking his every clumsy movement as he drank. I confess these grotesque guardians were not what I expected. There is something almost inhuman in the decay of age, something that crouches, primitive and unsettling, as the years strip away the gentler qualities of humanity. Their silence, their bent frames, their cold hostility toward me, and toward one another, filled the room with unease. "If you will show me this haunted chamber," I said, "I shall make myself comfortable there." The coughing old man jerked his head so suddenly that I flinched, his red eyes flashing beneath the shade. Yet no answer came. I waited, scanning their faces. "If you will show me the room," I repeated more firmly, "I will spare you the burden of entertaining me." "There's a candle on the slab outside," muttered the man with the withered arm, his gaze fixed upon my feet. "But if you go to the Red Room tonight—" "This night of all nights," croaked the old woman. "You go alone." "Very well," I replied. "Which way must I go?" He gave his directions in a low, deliberate voice. "Along the passage, through the door, up the spiral stair. Halfway a landing with a baize-covered door. Beyond that a long corridor. At its end, steps to the left. There lies the Red Room." I repeated the path, and he corrected me once. "And are you truly going?" asked the man with the shade, tilting his face in that strange, unnatural way. "This night of all nights," the old woman echoed again. "It is what I came for," I said, moving toward the door. The man with the shade rose, staggering closer to the fire, joining the others. At the threshold, I turned back. They stood huddled together, dark against the glow, their ancient faces fixed upon me with a gaze so intent it seemed to follow me into the corridor beyond.
"Good night," I said, pulling the door wide. "It is your own choosing," replied the man with the withered arm, his words heavy with warning. I kept the door open until the candle burned steady, then shut them in and stepped into the cold, echoing passage. The strangeness of those three ancient custodians lingered with me, their bent forms, their spectral silence, the room itself steeped in relics of a forgotten age. They seemed less like people than remnants of another century, when omens were trusted, witches feared, and ghosts undeniable. Even their garments carried the dust of dead minds, fashions long buried. The furniture, the ornaments, the very air of that chamber felt haunted, not alive, but echoing with thoughts of men long gone. I forced such musings aside and pressed on. The subterranean corridor was draughty and thick with dust. My candle flared, shadows shrinking and quivering against the walls. The spiral staircase answered with hollow echoes, and as I climbed, one shadow swept up behind me, while another fled into the darkness above. At the landing I paused, straining to catch a faint rustle, imagined or real, I could not tell. Satisfied at last of silence, I pushed open the baize-covered door and stepped into the corridor. The sight struck me with unexpected clarity. Moonlight streamed through the grand window of the grand staircase, carving the hall into sharp contrasts of silver and black. Everything lay in perfect order, as though the house had been abandoned only yesterday, not 18 months past. Candles still rested in their sconces, and the dust upon the carpets and polished floor was spread so evenly it vanished beneath the moon's glow. I moved forward and froze. From around the corner, a bronze figure revealed itself, its shadow cast with startling precision on the white paneling. For a breathless instant it seemed not sculpture, but a crouching presence waiting to spring upon me from the dark. I stood frozen, my hand resting in the pocket where my revolver lay. Summoning my nerve, I stepped forward, only to find the moonlight glinting upon a statue of Ganymede and the eagle. Relief flickered through me, and even the porcelain Chinaman upon the buhl table, his head rocking silently as I passed, barely stirred my composure. The door to the Red Room loomed in a shadowed recess, the steps leading to it swallowed in darkness. I swept my candle from side to side, probing the gloom,
imagining the spot where my predecessor had been discovered. The memory of that tale struck me with sudden unease. Casting one last glance at the moonlit Ganymede, I turned hastily, opened the door, and slipped inside, my face half turned toward the pallid silence of the landing. I shut the door firmly, turned the key in its lock, and raised the candle high. Before me stretched the chamber of my vigil, the great red room of Lorraine Castle. It was here the young Duke had met his fate, not within the room itself, but upon the very steps I had just climbed, collapsing in death as he sought to defy its legend. Superstition had claimed him and others before him, their stories clinging to these walls like cobwebs spun from fear. The tale of a timid wife, undone by her husband's cruel jest, lingered among the shadows. Looking around, I could understand how such legends had taken root. The alcoves, the recesses, the window bays all seemed to harbor secrets, their darkness fertile with dread. My candle was a frail tongue of flame, an island of light adrift in a sea of mystery. Beyond its reach stretched an ocean of suggestion, a vastness that seemed alive with unseen possibilities. Determined to master the room before it mastered me, I resolved upon a systematic search. I checked the lock once more, then moved deliberately through the chamber, examining each piece of furniture, lifting the bed's heavy valances and flinging its curtains wide to banish the lurking shadows. I drew up the blinds, tested the fastenings of each window, and shut the shutters tight. Leaning forward, I peered into the black throat of the chimney, then rapped the oak panels for any hidden doorways. 2 great mirrors stood in the room, each flanked by sconces with candles and more china candlesticks along the mantel. One by one I lit them, until their flames trembled against the gloom. The fire had been laid, an unexpected courtesy from the old housekeeper, and I set it alight. When the blaze grew strong, I stood with my back to it, surveying the chamber once more. I had dragged a chintz-covered armchair and a table before me, a makeshift barricade, and upon it lay my revolver within easy reach. My careful inspection steadied me, yet the deeper shadows of the room and its oppressive stillness stirred the imagination too keenly. The crackling of the fire offered no comfort. Its echoes only sharpened the silence. The alcove at the far end seemed to harbor a presence, an indefinable suggestion of something alive, lurking in solitude. At last, to silence the thought, I carried a candle into the recess, proved it empty, and left the flame upon the floor as a sentinel. By now my nerves were taut, though reason told me there was no cause. My mind remained clear. I admitted freely that nothing supernatural could occur. To occupy myself, I strung together rhymes in the manner of Inglesby, weaving verses from the old legend of the place. A few I spoke aloud, but the echoes returned harsh and unfriendly, so I abandoned the attempt. Likewise, I gave up a muttered debate with myself on the impossibility of ghosts. My thoughts drifted back to the 3 twisted figures downstairs, and I tried to hold them there. Yet the heavy reds and blacks of the chamber unsettled me. Even with 7 candles, the room was dim, the alcove flame flickering in a draught, the firelight sending shadows sliding and shifting across the walls. Seeking relief, I remembered the candles I had seen in the passage. With effort, I carried one light into the moonlit corridor, left the door ajar, and returned with 10 more, their flames ready to battle the darkness. I set the candles in every hollow and recess, balancing them in china ornaments, placing them on the floor, in the window bays, wherever the shadows pressed deepest. 17 flames in all, so arranged that not a single corner of the chamber lay untouched by light. It even occurred to me, half in jest, that should the ghost arrive, I might warn him not to stumble over them. The room glowed cheerfully now, the little tongues of fire streaming upward, their warmth oddly reassuring. Snuffing and tending them gave me something to do, a rhythm to mark the passing of time. Yet beneath that comfort, the weight of expectation pressed heavily upon me. It was after midnight when the candle in the alcove died without warning. I did not see it fade. I simply turned and found the shadow had returned, sudden and absolute, like the silent arrival of a stranger.
"By Jove," I muttered, "that draught is strong indeed." Matches in hand, I crossed the room in deliberate calm to relight it. The first match failed, the second flared, and in that instant something blinked upon the wall. I turned sharply. The 2 candles by the fireplace had gone out. I rose at once, startled. "Odd," I said aloud. "Did I do that myself without knowing?" I relit one, but even as I did, the candle in the mirror's sconce winked out, followed instantly by its twin. There was no mistake. The flames vanished as though pinched between invisible fingers, leaving the wicks cold and black, without smoke or blow. I stood gaping, and the candle at the foot of the bed surrendered next. The shadows crept closer, advancing step by step. "This will not do," I cried, my voice rising to a strange high pitch. One after another, the candles upon the mantel followed, their flames snuffed out in silence. "What's happening?" I shouted, panic edging my tone. The wardrobe candle died. The alcove flame I had just restored flickered once and was gone. "Steady now," I muttered, forcing a laugh that rang hollow, scratching desperately at a match for the mantel candles. My hands shook so violently that twice I missed the rough edge of the box. As the mantel flared back into light, 2 candles in the far window guttered out, swallowed by shadow. With the same match, I relit the mirror's flames and those near the doorway, and for a fleeting moment it seemed I was winning against the darkness. But then, in a sudden volley, 4 lights vanished at once from different corners of the room. I struck another match in trembling haste, frozen in indecision over where to take it. Before I could choose, an unseen hand seemed to sweep across the table, snuffing both candles there. With a cry, I dashed to the alcove, then the corner, then the window, relighting 3, only to see 2 more die by the fireplace. Realizing a better tactic, I dropped the matches upon the iron-bound deed box and seized the bedroom candlestick. It spared me the delay of striking matches, yet the relentless process continued. The shadows pressed forward, creeping step by step, reclaiming the room like a storm cloud sweeping across the stars. Now and then a flame returned, only to vanish again. My composure shattered. Panting, disheveled, I leapt from candle to candle in a frantic struggle against that merciless advance. I bruised my thigh against the table, sent a chair crashing, stumbled, fell, and dragged the cloth from the table in my collapse. My candle rolled away, and I snatched another as I rose, only for it to be blown out by the rush of my own movement. Instantly, the 2 remaining flames followed. Yet there was still light, the fire. A red glow held back the shadows, and I thought wildly, I can thrust my candle between the bars and relight it. I turned toward the grate, where the flames still danced among the coals, casting red splashes across the furniture. I had barely taken 2 steps when the fire faltered. Its glow collapsed, its reflections rushed together and vanished. As I thrust my candle between the bars, the darkness closed upon me like the sudden shutting of an eye. It wrapped me in a suffocating embrace, sealed my vision, and crushed the last fragments of reason from my mind. My candle slipped from my hand. I flung out my arms, desperate to push back that ponderous blackness, and screamed, once, twice, thrice, my voice breaking against the void. I staggered upright, frantic, and thought wildly of the moonlit corridor. With my head bowed and arms shielding my face, I ran blindly for the door. But I had forgotten its exact place. I crashed heavily against the bed's corner, reeled back, turned, and struck myself against some other hulking piece of furniture. I remember battering myself to and fro in that cramped struggle, my own cries echoing in the dark. Then came a brutal blow upon my forehead, a sickening sensation of falling that seemed to last an eternity, my last frantic effort to keep my footing. And then, nothing.
Daylight. I opened my eyes to find my head roughly bandaged, the man with the withered arm watching me closely. I looked around, confused, unable to recall what had happened. In the corner, the old woman was no longer lost in abstraction. She poured medicine from a small blue phial into a glass. "Where am I?" I asked. "I seem to know you, and yet I cannot remember who you are." They told me then, speaking of the haunted red room as though it were a tale. "We found you at dawn," said the man, "with blood upon your forehead and lips." Slowly, painfully, my memory returned. "You believe now," said the old man, "not as one who challenges, but as one who mourns a broken companion." "Yes," I whispered. "The room is haunted." "And you have seen it," they whispered. "We, who have lived here all our lives, have never dared. Tell us, was it truly the old earl who haunts the chamber?" "No," I answered firmly. "It is not." "I told you so," muttered the old woman, clutching her glass. "It is the poor young countess, terrified to death." "It is not," I said again. "There is no ghost of earl or countess in that room. There is no ghost at all. But something worse, far worse." They leaned forward. "What is it?" "The most dreadful of all that can haunt mortal man," I said. "Fear itself. Fear that shuns light and sound, that defies reason, that deafens, darkens, and overwhelms. It followed me through the corridor. It fought against me in the room." I stopped, my hand rising unconsciously to the bandages on my brow. A silence fell. Then the man with the shade sighed deeply. "That is it. I knew it. A power of darkness. To lay such a curse upon a woman. It lingers always. You can feel it even in daylight, even on a bright summer's afternoon. It hides in the hangings, in the curtains, always behind you, no matter how you turn. At dusk, it creeps along the corridor, following, pressing close until you dare not look back. There is fear in that room, black fear, and it will remain so long as this house of sin endures."
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more.
And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear, told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.